Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the studio. We're talking about the latest from the Egyptian economy, something that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the cabinet of Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli have emphasized that needs their attentions to get the Egyptian economy to the 2030 economic plan that has been set out for it. And to tell us more about the status of the Egyptian economy is economic expert Mr. Hany Abou-el Fotouh. Thank you very much for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. And as Nancy noted in her introduction, the President is concerned with facilitating the procedures to run businesses and to encourage new businesses and startups. That was discussed during the latest ministerial meeting. Can you please elaborate on that?
First, thank you very much indeed for inviting me here today. Let me shed some lights on the Doing Business report, and which triggered actually the President to give his directives for facilitating business in Egypt. The Doing Business report was initiated by a famous researcher called Simon Degenkov in year 2003 at the World Bank Group, and since then the Ease of Business Index is produced and updated yearly for measuring the regulations for starting businesses and protections of property rights. In 190 countries, the index includes 190 countries, and fortunately this year Egypt jumped from 127 to 120 on the index. The lower the number is, the better status for starting business in an economy. So this index indeed shows that economies which have measures and regulations for doing business are more attractive for investors, whether foreign investors or local investors. There are 10 areas in this index which measures how easy for an investor or for an investor to start a business. For example, getting construction permits, regulations for permits for workers, access to electricity, access to funds for and credit facilities. So indeed the improvement which made by Egypt last year in this area is significant, and yet we hope that the coming years Egypt would achieve better status in this index.
How does the Doing Business report encourage foreign investors from doing business here in the country?
The more simple and straightforward regulations is a more incentive for an investor to start a business. An investor, particularly a foreign investor, would look at economies that provide ease in regulations for starting a business in all areas. Particularly this index, the Doing Business report, listed 10 areas which investors normally would look at before taking any investment decisions. So every year the 190 countries on the list have a challenge to improve the rating in this index. So in Egypt, for example, we have provided several incentives and improvements for investors to do business here in terms of improvements in the legislative infrastructures, access to funds, access to electricity, and I would hope that next year also Egypt ranks better than this year.
Sir, as an economic expert, how do you evaluate Egypt's current economic growth?
The Egypt current economic program, I mean the reform program, started in year 2016, and it is expected to end towards the end of this year. The progress made so far in this economic reform program is impressive in many areas. For example, the growth rate, the growth rate is expected to reach 5.8 instead of the forecast, which was 5.2, and this has been adjusted by the World Bank due to the improvements achieved on different fronts. Similarly, there are other improvements in terms of the unemployment rate, which stands now at 9%, which last year was...
It went down from 13%?
Yes, 12 point something, last year. Foreign direct investment in Egypt, although globally decreased by 40%, Egypt in the first half of the fiscal year achieved improvement of 24%. There are many indicators in the economic front which shows that this program is progressing very well, and towards the end, still much has to be done towards the end of this year in order to complete the measures, the economic measures in this program.
Yes.
Well, if we talk about also taking a look at some of the other initiatives that have been launched to improve the economy, there's been a great deal of emphasis on small and medium-sized enterprises. Could you tell me your thoughts on government efforts to encourage SMEs in the country?
Currently, the Parliament is studying a law for SMEs, small and medium enterprises. This is the first ever piece of legislation in Egypt to formally tackle this huge segment, and as you are aware, the SME sector in Egypt constitutes nearly 85 to 90% of all businesses. Similarly, the Central Bank of Egypt a couple of years ago launched an SME initiative. 200 billion Egyptian pounds was financing allocation to this sector at a lower interest rate, currently stands at 5%. This initiative is primarily aimed to provide funds to SMEs in order to generate more business and enable them to be operative in the economy. Until this moment, nearly 115 billion Egyptian pounds were spent to finance the SME sectors. Until the end of this year, it's expected that the rest of the fund should be consumed as well.
Sir, speaking about laws and regulations, do you believe that the investment law that was issued or ratified recently by the Egyptian Parliament, does it fulfill the ambitions of investors, and is it what was expected from the investors to encourage them to come and invest in Egypt?
I tend to say to a great extent, yes, indeed. The new investment law, as you may be aware, provided certain incentives and safeguards to investors, whether local investors or foreign investors. For example, no confiscation. One of the safeguards in the new investment law that it prohibits the confiscations of businesses without a final court order, and set some measures for the arbitration as well. Also, some investments, some incentives also for foreign investors, like granting permanent residence for investors, and the investors can also recruit foreign nationals to work in the business with the minimal requirements. Also a single license hub in the Ministry of Investment for granting licenses. Some other, there are several benefits in the new law, and I believe that if I were an investor, I would take it very seriously to evaluate the benefits of starting business in Egypt, seeing that these incentives and safeguard measures have already taken place.
Some economic experts like to suggest that it's always good to see the industries or the areas where more foreign investments are needed, and sort of veer foreign companies to come and invest in this particular industry, so on and so forth. Are you for that, or do you believe that we can just encouraging investments in all industries?
One good thing that has happened recently, the investment map. Okay, the investment map was produced maybe a year or more than a year ago, which shows the opportunities for new businesses in Egypt by sector. So at a glance, a potential investor who would be interested in exploring what are the opportunities, investment opportunities are there in Egypt, would look at the investment map at the GAFI website. So yes, it is focused, it is concise, it shows at a glance what are the opportunities and benefits for doing business in certain areas and several industries.
Mr. Hany, also speaking about local production, how do you evaluate the current status of the government in local production, and does the imports affect the increase in the imports affects the status quo of the economy?
I believe that the government has taken some measures in order to reduce the importation of non-essential goods in a way to direct the attention to local production. We all as citizens, we should also change our consuming habits and support the Egyptian industry. Okay, and non-essential goods, I mean, we can survive without expending extra money in non-essential goods. Similarly, the directives of the government to the local businesses is to improve the quality of the production
in order to be competitive.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
We began talking about indexes and obviously Egypt's ranking internationally. Also recently, Standard Chartered also said that Egypt by 2030 would be the 7th largest economy. How will that also affect investing here in the country?
All these are very positive news.
Right.
Okay, as investors would normally, again, I repeat it again and again, investors would also look at the overview of the economy, the outlook of the economy, not in 1 or 2 or 3 years, but also in the medium and long term, because sustainable the investment decision is long term. So as an investor, I would look at how the economy would look like in 10 years' time. And incidentally, the Standard Chartered report showed a very positive news about the status of the Egyptian economy in year 2030. I see this very positive, and we should leverage on that in attracting investors to do business in Egypt.
Mr. Hany, also, does the Central Bank of Egypt play a role in the economic growth of Egypt?
Definitely, definitely. The Central Bank of Egypt plays a very important role in the monetary policy. And all the banking rules and regulations are constantly reviewed in order to streamline these regulations and ensure that the banking industry stands at a very healthy position and doing business as well for local and investment, the financial needs from the banking side is streamlined, and the access of funds and credit facilities from the banking industry is available to local and foreign investors according to the international banking standards and best practices.
Yes.
Do you think we should expand who we're trying to attract in terms of regions, for example? Mostly cooperation is with Europe. Should we turn more so towards Africa, Asia, and so on and so forth?
I think yes, indeed. Egypt is not ignoring its important position as a hub in the region for attracting businesses. It is the gate for Africa. By way of example, Egypt is looking very seriously at opportunities to increase the bilateral relations, economic relations with the African countries. And if you look 7 or 8 years back and compare the status of the economic relations between Egypt and most of the African countries, you would easily recognize that Egypt achieved a very good progress in establishing economic relations with African countries.
Mr. Hany, speaking about Africa, just picking on what you said, how can Egypt exploit its presidency over the AU summit upcoming February in attracting new investments and opening new cooperations opening new cooperation between African countries?
Any regional or international summits is a good opportunity and a platform for establishing bilateral and multilateral relations with the contributing countries. So we've seen in the past, and we see today, and we will see tomorrow, that attracting new business, establishing new memorandum of understanding in different areas with different economic partners is guaranteed with every international or regional event.
Are there areas that you as an economic expert hope that the government would pay more attention to or would actually invest more time in?
I would still say that more efforts need to be done in getting rid of the bureaucracy at government offices.
Right.
Yes, we made a progress, but yet much has to be done. Take, for example, in the Doing Business report and the Ease of Business Index, Tunisia, the rank is 80, while Egypt is 120. Israel is 49, while Egypt is 120. Emirates is also stands at a good status on the index. So I would hope that we do more efforts in getting rid of the red tapes, the bureaucracy at different government offices.
What other challenges, sir, remain or act as a hindrance or a barrier in the face of the economic progress, other than bureaucracy?
Population. The overpopulation is actually a threatening problem. The progress which the country, the economy achieve is undermined by the uncontrolled growth of populations. So if we achieve growth rate of 5.8% and the population increase by 2.5%, I mean this is not good at all, because all the yield of the economic growth would be undermined in spending extra money to support or to finance the needs for the new population.
Well, the government has launched an initiative, 2 is enough. We hope that this will limit or cut down the growing number of the population.
Let's cross hands and hope that it would work.
If we go back to the Doing Business report, something that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation is that the report also measures the regulation of 11 areas. Could you tell us a bit more about that? What are those 11 areas?
10 areas,
10,
indeed.
okay.
if my memory serves me right, because I don't recall all these fundamental areas, ease of getting construction permits for new businesses, working permits, access to electricity, access to credit and credit information, insolvency measures.
Yeah.
I think I ticked 5 or 6 out of 10.
By this, we come to the end of this segment. We really do appreciate your insight, Mr. Hany Abou-el Fotouh, economic expert. Thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, a quick break and then we'll be back for our second segment. Stay tuned.